Hi,
Hey,
Dan. How's it
how you
going?
doing? How are things?
Good. Yeah, we just had a long weekend, so this Tuesday has been quite eventful getting back. What about
Yeah,
you? What time is this meeting normally for you?
this is 7 a.m., which is
Okay. Yeah, wow. That is quite the other time. I had
yeah.
a 7 a.m. one this morning actually, which is kind of a horrible bookmarks. I went to the container orchestrated device working group meeting this
Mhm.
morning. Um,
Cool.
and so it's funny just having bookend community meetings on either side, but that's the fun part about being in this space is people are all over the world. So
Yeah. But this is the weird time we chose in the beginning. Someone asked for like a APEC friendly time zone, and we set it up, and then yeah,
what
it's there for years.
what time is the other one at for you? The one that we have at like 9 a.m.s or is it 8?
That's like a 6 p.m. for me, which is
Oh,
completely fine. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, definitely something to consider.
Yeah.
Hi. Hey, Rishit.
Hello.
Welcome, welcome. Where are you located?
Oh, so I'm from India.
Are you okay? Are you there now?
Yeah.
So it's
So I just came back from KubeCon Europe 3 days ago.
okay, awesome. Yep. A lot of us are coming back. So is it 10 a.m. for you then?
Oh, it's 10:30.
Okay. Yep. Wow, that's crazy. Completely different day. I think Steve might roll in a little too, but we can probably wait a few minutes before we get started. Hi, Steve.
Hello.
Hi, everybody.
Hey, Steve.
Hello, hello. Um,
Well, usually we wait until about 3 minutes after, and it's 3 minutes after, so
Perfect.
maybe it's time.
Yeah. Do you want to kick us off with the spiel, Steve?
Sure. So welcome to the June 1st meeting of the Kubernetes IoT Edge Working Group. This group, as usual, abides by the Kubernetes Code of Conduct, which means all meetings are public and recorded. So if you don't want to be recorded and have that recording put up to YouTube, drop now or turn off your camera and keep yourself muted. With that said, unless somebody added something, the agenda tonight had an item discussing about why and how this group is moving over from this Kubernetes project over to the CNCF. So I'm going to let Dion and Kate take over on that subject because they've been the ones doing the work on doing the arrangements on this. And I don't know if you've got anything to prepare, Kate, but I'm going to make you a co-host too. So you should
Great.
be able to share if you've got anything to share.
Yeah. I think just a general discussion. So we joined the runtime tags session at KubeCon Europe. And in that session kind of talked about some of the motivation there. So that's also a good resource to kind of look at some of the statements we made around this. But previously this working group has lived in the Kubernetes working group space. And as we went to kind of renew for the next year, we kind of thought about, okay, maybe there would be a better place for this. And oftentimes Kubernetes working groups are working towards specific objectives, and some of those objectives are sometimes adding things to Kubernetes upstream. And that hasn't necessarily been the scope of this working group. It's more been around bringing people from across different projects, whether CNCF or external, to kind of discuss edge and IoT solutions. And a lot of them are Kubernetes based, but not all of them. So one of the topics that Steve talked about in the working group session at KubeCon EU was about secure device onboard, which is a tool for provisioning servers on the edge, kind of in a zero touch way. And that's not Kubernetes specific. It can be used to provision Kubernetes clusters, but it's not Kubernetes specific. And so we were looking at transitioning to the CNCF to kind of expand the scope of the working group beyond Kubernetes. And it also is a good space for not necessarily having to have the objective of contributing to upstream Kubernetes. Dehan, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, not much. I think that's the gist of it, right?
So then I think, or I guess, any questions on that?
Well, I guess one thing that I think is a natural to account for is just when it's likely to take place. In other words, when are we officially gone from Kubernetes and officially in CNCF?
Mm-hmm.
I have a feeling that one of the repercussions of that is that our Zoom links will change, for example. And there's probably some other administrative, like the Kubernetes project won't keep us in their calendar anymore. They probably won't keep us under the Kubernetes project for the video recordings on YouTube, but I assume the CNCF has an alternate place. So I think what we'll do is probably just leave some pointers behind in all those places so people can discover where we move to. But we'll probably need a little prep time to lay those things down and begin operation at the other one.
Yeah, I do think the first step, so I was talking to Ricardo from the runtime tag, is really to create our pull request into runtime.
Okay.
And so the Bash working group, the Bash System Initiative working group, has their PR up because they were the other working group that presented at the runtime tag that's also joining. And I messaged Ricardo kind of asking, because another thing was, as a part of a Kubernetes working group, we've been able to present at KubeCons kind of the work that our group has brought together. Currently with the runtime tag, they kind of have one talk for their working group. And so he mentioned having the pull request up would be a good spot to to have that conversation around of creating a session for us within the CNCF. But having that charter in progress shows that that is a legitimate step we're taking. And so I'll drop a link to that, and also we can put this in the notes, but this is the one that the Bash System Initiative Working Group has up. And so I think we would want to, Dehan started a charter for us. And so I think maybe we can switch that to being kind of this markdown format where we give an introduction, a background, some goals, some in scope and out of scope, operations details. So like who are our TOC liaison and chairs from the SIG, and then who are the tech leads, and then community information. So the things you were talking about, Steve, where it's, I think for now we can probably point to our existing YouTube channel, but we're going to want to make a new Slack channel and maybe a new mailing list. And I think it's fine to use our existing YouTube channel, and existing Zoom links for the time being. Kubernetes is a part of the CNCF. I think that is probably fine to start with, but certainly something we can explore in the pull request.
Yeah, I think it's probably okay to even have us overlapped in both places for a while, just not indefinite. And
Yeah,
know,
until people figure out the transition, right?
I mean, we probably have to open up in the new one just to get all our links. And in order to leave the pointers, we still have to have edit rights for where we used to live. So I
Mhm.
would anticipate that we overlap by, I don't know, maybe a month or something.
Yeah, and we can have GitHub page redirects too. So the
Mhm.
redirect can happen from, I don't know actually if you can do that with individual pages. I know you can do it with orgs, but something to look
My
into
main
as well.
concern is if we can move the Slack channel. That would be a big one, because that's the main notification tool we have. If we can just move it, that would
Move
be
it
awesome.
versus like move it to keep the history, you're
Yeah.
saying? Yeah, I
And
agree.
keep the membership, because
I don't think we could keep
I don't know.
membership clearly because you have to be a part of the CNCF Slack
Yeah.
workspace. I
No,
don't know if we can do, yeah,
they're different Slacks, so that's probably kind of hard. Otherwise you could rename, but
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be interesting. Is there another group that's done this before? My guess is no, but I don't know.
Not aware of it,
you
yeah.
know, I'm kind of thinking that Cube Edge moved from Kubernetes to CNCF, like Sandbox, but they
Mm,
actually kept their Slack channel over under Kubernetes. Now,
mm.
since they're a Kubernetes distro, maybe that makes sense, but that's the one I'm aware of that a project transitioned.
I
Like, where does
mean,
Akri live? Does Akri live in the Kubernetes Slack or over in CNCF?
we still live in Kubernetes,
Yeah.
and we're a
So
CNCF
maybe we
sandbox
don't even
project.
have to move it. I don't know.
I mean, I think that's reasonable. Like for example, the container orchestrated device working group that's under runtime doesn't have its own Slack channel. They just use the runtime tag Slack channel,
Mm-hmm.
which I would prefer not to have the case. I like that we have our own channel. People ask good questions about scenarios. So I think, yeah, keeping it in Kubernetes would probably be fine.
Maybe let's just do it unless somebody
Yeah.
on the Kubernetes project asks us to leave.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe lay down in the migration steps that would make sense. I think it's a good opportunity to reschedule the meetings and what we discussed before. Maybe go for once a month, or what do you guys think?
I think every 2 weeks is probably good to start out, especially because we had some people coming out of KubeCon who wanted to present. Like I know the container orchestrated device working group, those folks wanted to come to this. I went to their meeting this morning. I was telling Dehan that, and they are basically making it so that you can request devices with parameters and extending the Kubernetes API to do that. And so they have some interesting things that they could present and share as they do pertain to the IoT space. They actually pertain very heavily to Akri, which is why I went to listen into a bit. But yeah, so they're an example. And then I know Steve talked to some other people who are interested, and yeah. So
Yeah, I think Portainer wanted to come back. It's been about a year since they talked to us, so they were interested in doing an update. And Intel was aware of the secure device onboard, but they have some more tools sort of related to that, but maybe extend the mission beyond just the initial onboard. And they said that they'd be interested in giving a presentation.
yeah, so I think we got some good touch points out of KubeCon, so the frequency might be good to keep up. I do think we've talked about this time, and I do think we could probably adjust the time. So yeah, I mean,
No, it's okay. I mean, we have today Rishit here for whom we created these kind of times to be like a good fit for India and China and like that. So if we get traction, it's even better. So, and yes, Steve will know. I mean, the biggest hurdle we ever had with this working group is changing the meeting times, because like 6 months later, people are still showing up on Fridays, even if it's moved to Wednesday. So the less disruption in the people calendars, the better. So yeah, I'm okay
So
with
you
it.
think keep it with one time for that reason, or keep it with what we already have for that reason?
Keeping with what we already have, if that's possible. That's
Yeah, if we want to go 2 weeks instead of monthly, one of these 2 times is a little difficult, but I've managed to live with it. So I can continue to live with it, and it's probably convenient for some. So
Yeah, I think it's I think it would also be a fair point, though. We do have a pretty big community. It might be worth just putting out a poll. We have 533 people in that Slack, like, and maybe we should pick what the majority of people pick. Especially if we're reevaluating everything. If we have to create a whole new document, people are going to expect some things to change. So I think now is the time to reevaluate our times if we're going to.
okay. I've got nothing against periodic polls. It could just be that people will stick with the original anyway, but one way to find out is to do the poll.
Yeah.
so what worked for us in the past is that even when we have a much bigger attendance, was that like a regular meeting cycle was much more visited. So that was the regular session, and we used these kind of APEC sessions as a working sessions, because if it's just us, we can work on a KubeCon presentation or whatever it's coming. So that cadence was also good for that, right? So one more public, one more private, but not by design, right?
Yeah. Now, the one thing I found was this cycle one late at night is tougher to get speakers, but then my contacts are mostly North America based. So it just might be me, and that I'm not that great at lining up speakers coming out of APAC region.
Yeah. Cool.
So
it sounds
agenda-wise, did we cover this, or is there more on this topic?
well, I think it depends how much we want to dive into this being a working meeting. I think we could start looking at making that PR and go back to that charter that you started on. I think that would be a reasonable thing to do. I also want to make sure that, Rishit, if there's anything that you were hoping to get out of this meeting, we can also prioritize that before maybe diving into like looking at kind of getting hands-on with what a charter would look like for us.
This was my first meeting. So I was at the Project Acri sponsor showcase at KubeCon, and I met Edric over there, and he motivated me to join some of the working group activities. So this is actually my first meeting, so just seeing how the working group functions and so on. And I probably hope to contribute soon.
Well, often we have speakers and sometimes no agenda at all, in which case just whoever shows up we tell each other what we're interested in at the moment, or interesting things we've seen recently. So maybe we can take a few minutes to do that right now and get back to working on the transition after we have a little bit of discussion. Maybe you can tell us what kinds of things are you interested in related to Edge? What is it you're trying to do or curious about?
Oh, sure. So I usually work a lot with machine learning. So it's often research, and I've also been interested in Edge. One of my recent papers was actually about a new Edge algorithm we had developed. So I'm quite interested in running machine learning on the edge. And recently I've been exploring a lot of federated learning on the edge, how you can do so with Kubernetes and Acri. So I actually worked with that and also have a talk coming up on that. So hopefully at KubeCon or some other place probably. But yeah, I have this talk coming up on federated machine learning on the edge with
Yeah,
Kubernetes.
as far as I'm concerned, you're welcome to give that talk here, even if you want to do a practice session, go ahead and do it for a future meeting. That topic certainly interests me. What
Yes.
would it be that you'd cover related to federated learning at the edge? You know, right now, in my experience, the more common scenario is people collect training sets at the edge and then do the actual learning up at a higher level than at the edge itself. But I'm kind of curious as to what the advantage is of doing it at the edge and what's different about it versus doing it in a public cloud.
So the main difference is, so one of the things we were excited. So my friend and I are actually working on this effort. So one of the things we were interested in is not having the data leave the device itself.
Okay, so data sovereignty issues.
Yeah, so the data does not leave the device, but we improve the model somehow and also improve it for other users. So that was one of our main motivations while exploring federated machine learning. And so the talk which we were planning to do was how to run computations in this manner. So we would start off with something like how do you run computations in this sense? And it could just be general computations as well. And then move on to a machine learning. So I also maintain a couple of TensorFlow projects. I contribute very actively to TensorFlow. So, and then we would go on and say, hey, here's a TensorFlow model. How do you run it? How do you improve it with federated machine learning on the edge? So that was the agenda for the talk.
Yeah, that sounds like a good talk to me. You know, the other thing I've noticed recently is there seems to be more GPU-like accelerator chips that are appropriate for edge devices coming out. You know, and in the early days, those things used to be such power hungry and usually demanding PCI Express buses and things to host them. But it seems like more and more of these microcontrollers now are coming out with chips that assist the machine learning process out at edge locations that have reduced cost, reduced power, and maybe are even bundled into a lot of these edge devices. Are those things supported by the TensorFlow libraries and things typically?
Yeah. So the idea was that you take a TensorFlow Lite model, and TensorFlow Lite is a project which I contribute a lot to. And what we also do is we support edge GPUs and edge TPUs. So you can pretty much harness the power of GPUs and TPUs very well with TensorFlow Lite.
Do you know if Google has started selling the TPUs that they're using in like Pixel 6 for use in edge devices, or is that on the roadmap, or do you even know?
No, I'm not aware of that, but that sounds interesting. If that is.
Well, you know, the same processing units that are in cell phones should be fairly inexpensive and fairly conservative about power consumption, and likely have big production volumes, which tends to align with low cost. So it wouldn't surprise me to find out that those find their way out at edge, unless, you know, the current chip manufacturing constraints are maybe causing them to be in short supply.
Makes sense. That sounds really interesting. We could have TPUs and sounds interesting.
So in all of these scenarios, are the models running on the devices that are capturing the data as well? Or is there kind of a mix of like running on separate compute that has access to those devices?
Often the models are running on the device which is collecting the data. So running the model is a main part. Improving the model is one of the secondary goals. But if you could do that alongside without the data leaving the device itself, then it's a win.
And is it a variety of devices? Like what kind of, or with the scenarios you're looking at, what are those devices?
So often edge devices, but not including microcontrollers. The areas I have explored this with is just mobile phones, because we have something called TensorFlow federated, which very well supports simulating such kind of devices. So right now I've only explored this in a little capacity with mobile phones, not yet microcontrollers and stuff. But yeah, that's definitely a nice experiment for me.
Very cool. And was this a talk that you're looking at submitting for KubeCon North America?
Oh yeah, so yeah, I'm actually submitting it for KubeCon North America, and I was wondering how it might work because I already had a talk at like KubeCon Europe, but on the machine learning and data track, and they told me about the time constraints. It was an accepted talk. They shifted it to KubeCon NA, so I don't know how it would work out, but I'll probably submit it to KubeCon NA anyways.
Yeah, I think if it was presented at KubeCon Europe, the same talk,
Oh no,
they won't take it at NA, but
oh no,
otherwise
I
it
had
should be
another
eligible.
talk at KubeCon Europe, and due to time constraints, I declined presenting it at KubeCon Europe and
Oh,
told them
okay.
to shift it to NA. Now there are two talks, so that is what I'm concerned about.
Yeah.
At two different talks.
So you're worried that your second submission won't go through because you already have one
Yeah.
that's accepted.
Yeah.
I think as long as they won't, with the reviewers, I mean, Steve actually knows this way better, but from my understanding, the reviewers don't know that you had another one.
Well, no, they'll
submitted
never
necessary.
take two talks. So I don't
I
think
thought if
you're,
it's different topics, it's fine.
no, only maintainer track. So I
Oh.
believe, and actually, I think there is another exception that if you're on a panel, then you can have a second non-panel. But otherwise, I don't think that two will ever be accepted. You are allowed to submit two, but they're likely to not. I don't believe the rules would let them take two conventional presentations. I could be wrong, but I think that's just up front in the CFP process where they say that. Let's just say it used to be that way, and they do change it from KubeCon to KubeCon, but there definitely has been a period where they will not accept two regular CFP talks by the same presenter.
That makes sense.
Now, the other thing you can do is, put one
SSM.
into the rejects conference or something like that if you really want to give them at the same conference.
Yeah, I'll also probably submit it the OSS summit.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Now, the OSS Summit North America, it's too late because that's coming up in just weeks. But
Yeah, the EU.
yeah,
Are you folks
Yeah,
also
cloud
going
native.
to OSS NA? I'm sorry for cutting you.
No, go ahead.
Are you also going to OSS NA?
I'm not. Steve, are
I
you?
probably am not, but you never know. But I think at this time I'm not. I'm not booked for travel there. Normally, I only get sent to them if I'm speaking, but you never know. Anyway, later in the year, there's Europe, and there's also Japan coming up in December, I believe.
Wow. Well, also, if you can't put it as a talk or don't want to for OSS Summit or Cloud Native Rejects for North America, you could also write an article about it, which is also another option.
Yeah, that is definitely there.
The other place it might fit is if they're having the Kubernetes on Edge Day event again, which I think they probably are. That's a separate submission, and it typically comes later.
Yeah, I actually attended the Kubernetes on Edge Day in KubeCon Europe. It was really fantastic.
Yeah,
So
there were a few machine learning talks at Kubernetes on Edge in Europe. So clearly they are looking for talks on that subject. So I think you have a lot of venues you can go for with a talk like that.
Thank you so much. Really insightful.
So the only other thing I can think of, do you have anything else you wanted to ask about as your first time here, or anything you're curious about? You go for it.
Oh, so one quick question. How do I, what's the best way to, let's say, a part of these meetings, which I'll of course be there, but what's the other best ways to get involved with working group IoT?
Well, the Slack channel, you can kind of just asynchronously ask questions or say whatever you want to encourage discussions. So that works pretty well. There in theory is a mailing list that when you join the group, there's an email list. And I think any member who wants could put something on there, but nobody really ever does it. So I don't think it's commonly used as a mechanism for interactive exchange. I think that pretty much occurs on Slack.
Okay, thank you so much.
And then we could get back to a working group meeting, but one other thing, I'll leave it to the audience to see if you're interested. So I did that secure device onboard demo at KubeCon. And one thing, you know, because of the limited time, the limited bandwidth to keep it from going live, it kind of got cut off. So I've still got that node that I kicked off running right now in my home lab. So if anybody was curious and wanted to see the remote management of that under Portainer, which is the part that got left on the cutting room floor, I could just briefly, if nobody's ever seen Portainer remote manage a Kubernetes installation before, I could spend a few minutes just sharing a screen and showing that, but up to you. And we might have the Portainer person coming to do a presentation in the near future anyway, so maybe that's not needed at this point.
No, I would love to see it.
Okay, let me share my screen and just drive it around the block kind of thing. Okay, can you see my browser?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is just a Portainer is running on some node. It doesn't have, it typically would not be the one that you're remote managing, but it could be, I suppose. So I've just got it running on another Edge Linux box. It's a low-powered Intel Atom 8 gig of RAM physical machine that is hosting this, running in Docker, and it just presents a web interface. I've already logged in, and this is the dashboard for this Kubernetes node that I onboarded using Secure Device Onboard. So like I said in the KubeCon presentation, it took like 25 minutes going from kind of nothing, just a bare OS that got upgraded. It pulled down OS upgrades, Docker, and installed a Kubernetes distro and deployed a single node cluster. And this cluster is just a kind cluster basically. So it's pretty simple, but this is the dashboard. In the dashboard, what it says our applications are actually the pods that are running. And I'm clicking on it here. It uses an agent model. So the Kubernetes that it is managing has an agent that only calls out. At no point does that Kubernetes need to open a port for Portainer to reach back in. So security-wise, it should be relatively safe. And this is showing all the pods that are running. I guess I'll just arbitrarily pick the Kubernetes cluster API server. You can drill down into here. I can get logs for this pod. some of this can be made more responsive because when you set this thing up, you define a ping rate for how often this managed remote node pings into the Portainer. I believe I've got it set for 5 seconds. So anytime I would do something like try to access these logs, I might have to wait up to 5 seconds before that node is even aware I've got a request in. So kind of that square equivalent of hourglass there is expected even if you're on a fast network. And this is all on gigabit E inside my home lab. So it's running pretty fast compared to perhaps what you might actually find in an edge network. But you can see I can, even if this Kubernetes node was out there somewhere at an edge, I can drill down and even look at individual pods, drill down into logs. It gives me control. I clicked on Helm here. Let's see how quickly this responds. And you can see here, it's got a GUI wrapper on top of the Bitnami Helm application. So you can pretty much pick things out of here to deploy them. I think in one of my tests, I just deployed an Nginx web server just to prove that this thing was remote manageable. You can look at your volumes, your config maps and secrets. That's about it. You can also run the kubectl shell. And once again, there seems to be roughly that 5-second latency here on getting this thing up and running. So kubectl will get pods. So all in all, it's pretty plausible in terms of what do you do after you remotely deploy a Kubernetes on a headless node. Now, I'm not sure what the experience would be at scale, right? I mean, if I've got 10,000 of them out there, I don't necessarily want to be using a GUI for this, but you know, it at least is, I don't know. I think it's more than better than nothing. It actually looks like a pretty useful tool. So
it's interesting how there, when you opened up the shell, it looked like the Portainer agent deployed a pod to enable this shell execution. I don't know if you noticed that, but there was a pod that had only been running for 29 seconds. That was the
that might be
kubectl
how
shell
they
pod.
did it. I talked to them about the possibility of even hosting CLIs in addition to kubectl. So even though that says kubectl shell, I believe you can actually run Helm and a command line in it. And then I inquired, the particular Kubernetes distro I used, which was the Tanzu one, has its own CLI. And I asked about what it would take to support that. And they said that this thing actually runs as a sidecar, and that what you could do is put together a custom version of this container to enhance what's in this kubectl shell. They don't give you raw complete access, probably for security. But yeah, you might be right about that being spun up as a pod itself. That would make sense. That in fact is how you install the Portainer agent, that use kubectl to lay it down on a Kubernetes with some creds and IDs so that it knows where to find the Portainer that's going to manage it. So anyway, that was my goal. I just, you know, if time had allowed, I would have shown this in that presentation, but it didn't. But I figured it was worth 5 minutes to drive it around the block for an audience. So yeah, it is what it is. And I found it pretty easy to install and use. So unless somebody wants to see anything else, I'm gonna stop the share. And then we've still got like 20 minutes if you want to try to turn this into a working session on the CNCF migration.
On a charter. So do we have any? Yeah, as I said in Slack, I dropped the ball a little bit on that in the last few weeks, but now it's a good time to pick it up.
Yeah. Having done charters over in Kubernetes, my suggested technique is to find somebody else who recently did one on another project and just go use them as a boilerplate that you would go edit from, because don't use one that's still in progress, use one that got accepted. And there's sort of an implication that it complies with whatever the expectation is. Because otherwise, I find that on Kubernetes, you're looking at these community documents that describe what goes in a charter, but they often didn't have an actual example.
So, I mean, in that case, we could look, if we want to focus on ones within runtime, we could look at the container orchestrated device one. I will say it seems pretty specific to its, because it is definitely a working group that had a deliverable to, so we can look at that. The bash one is in progress, like you were saying. So yeah, we could also look at, I don't know if y'all know of other working groups and other tags that maybe we could look at.
Yeah, offhand, I haven't gone and investigated it, but if you know where those live, maybe you could put a link to one there or open one up and share the screen.
I have it pulled up right now. Cool. I'll just share my screen. Can you all see this?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So this one, the container orchestrated device working group, this is the one that I actually went to this morning. So they put together CDI, or the container device interface, which is supported by Containerd, Cryo. I don't know exactly the list, but a bunch of runtimes. And what it basically does is it allows you to more declaratively request access to resources, access to device or physical hardware for your containers. And it's not Kubernetes specific. And then this working group has kind of gone beyond that now. And it has proposals for creating dynamic resource allocations. So they're essentially going to enhance the Kubernetes pod spec so that you can, just as you would add storage volumes, you could add devices in that way. And so it's basically providing an alternative to the device plugin interface, where instead of requesting extended resources created by device plugins, you would request these dynamic resources. And it would look different. And so they have a whole KEP, and it's been a process they've been undergoing for a while. I think it's led by a few folks from Intel. And so there's definitely resources on those that I can drop in the notes. But really interesting work there that's very much in progress. And they presented, their work was referenced at KubeCon in a couple talks. So anyways, you can see that they kind of explain their problem space. Of
you
not knowing really
down. Yeah, great.
Yeah, of not really knowing how to handle like hardware like GPUs and FPGAs across different orchestrators, so across Kubernetes and Nomad and Docker, and wanting to create a consistent experience, kind of is their statement.
Yeah, one thing I've found that I liked in certain other groups or SIGs is both a statement, I don't see it here so far, but maybe it's in here somewhere, of even a firm definition of what the scope of their coverage is, and also, as important, what it isn't, the things that they don't want to cover. I don't see it in this, but I think it might not be a bad idea.
Yeah, it's not in that, but that's a good transition to the one that's in progress for the runtime tag, which I know it's not completed, but for they do exactly that. They have their goal, in scope, out of scope, operations communities. It's very brief and it's in progress. So maybe that brevity is why it's still in progress, or maybe that's fine. And we could do this. We could create something quite brief, and then
Yeah,
build from there in the future.
Yeah, get feedback on it when we hoist
Yeah.
it up the flagpole.
Yeah.
And maybe even morph it between these two different versions and cherry pick what makes sense for us.
Yeah. Also look at our current one. Like what does it say under Kubernetes currently? Yeah.
yeah.
It is kind of interesting. I didn't even realize that the scope of the CNCF was going, that broad on orchestrators, but I guess it shouldn't be a surprise that they'd be embracing Nomad and other things too.
Yeah. And I guess, I mean, that makes sense. Like HashiCorp has a lot of stuff they've contributed to Kubernetes and as well, like their Vault plugins.
Yeah, in the early days, I don't think the CNCF tried to broaden the orchestrator spec to something like Apache Mesos, but it was maybe because the Apache Foundation already owned it. So I don't remember seeing things. The only thing like that went cross orchestrator was the CSI project, but it sort of lives off on its own.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm pulling up ours now too, our current one, to kind of see.
But it would actually be an interesting topic if we get scope broader than Kubernetes over in our new CNCF home to even have a presentation on using Nomad at Edge.
Mm-hmm.
That almost would have been like heretics in the church trying to do that while we were under the Kubernetes project, but
Yeah, no, I think that's an option. I think with WebAssembly, some of those solutions, they're using Nomad because Nomad has better support for WebAssembly. So there's interesting stuff there too.
Yeah, so that means maybe just like that other one you showed us, we maybe even want to drop an indication that we're, potentially multi-orchestrator looking towards the future.
Okay, yeah, that's a good note. So I'll just put in here further discussion.
And while you're at it, I mean, since you brought up WebAssembly, multi-container platform too.
I don't know if I would say container platform, multi-target.
Runtime? Yeah, I don't know.
Multi-application target slash awesome and runtime. Yeah. Well, okay, so let's do we want to just do a quick brainstorm and continue with the discussion of what's in scope and what's out of scope for us? So that was one thing that you mentioned, and is also something that the Bash System Initiative Working Group. So I think we can come up with an introduction and background. Background can include how we used to live in Kubernetes. I think maybe goal, it's interesting how to distinguish introduction, background, and goal. I don't know if y'all have immediate thoughts on that, but those are definitely could be some overlap there.
Yeah,
What
in
do people
terms of
think about
goals,
these?
I think it would be to, assist users and act as a forum for users to exchange ideas and best practices. But then in addition, bring up the fact that we may intend to go off and do white papers, reference architectures, those kinds of things as kind of models for how someone might do things. Another thing that maybe we have never called out, but it does seem to be an important undertaking that the group has been doing, is helping to organize conferences on these subjects.
Mhm. Like Edge Day.
Yeah, exactly. At some point, we could even potentially, I don't know how often we're going to come into venues where there's critical mass, but you know, over in the Kubernetes project, they're perhaps trying to investigate bringing back the whole meetup thing of local meetings in big metropolitan areas to cover areas. I don't actually know if Edge would get enough critical mass that you could get a physical meetup going, but maybe in certain cities you could.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Cool. Yeah, so I think introduction and background we can come up with, and then goals. It sounds like we have multi goals. I think we can almost bullet it, like you were saying, users for them to exchange and issues and best practices. Then it's also to put content out there in the form of white papers or reference architectures. And then third of all, it's to organize community in the
Yeah.
form of conferences and meetups and this working group in general. So it seems
And
like we have a three-faceted.
Yeah, and it's my recollection that some of this, like the background and the things about the white papers, I think are in the existing charter under the Kubernetes project. So maybe that could be lifted from there.
Mhm.
You know, it might need some edit, but there is some decent text there that we took some time into composing.
Yep. Yeah.
The
let
other
me
one
go
that
ahead.
has a pretty good background actually was kind of I believe that the description for the Kubernetes on Edge Day, it maybe is pretty Kubernetes specific, but it has some nice text on kind of the scope of Edge that might be a decent starting point for putting, you know, for making part of the background.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I think I don't know where the charter is not linked to this markdown here. Maybe it's
Yeah, I think the charters might be under the Kubernetes community where they lay out the working groups and SIGs, but I'm not sure about that. I'm not
it
even
might.
honestly sure whether I did the charter for this group. I think it existed before I joined. So
I mean, we
might
have
be
our
mixed
white
up on that.
paper, if
Yeah.
that's what you're thinking about too, like the original white paper, and then there's also the security one.
Mhm.
Yeah, but charter here is there's some goals in this README. I think that's if you go.
Well, let's put it this
little-
way. I think you're supposed to have a charter, but maybe this group predates that, and or maybe it lives somewhere else. I'm not really sure.
Or I think this could also be seen as a charter, a
Yeah,
listing
yeah.
of goals. It's a short one, but yeah.
Anyway, maybe we can start composing a shared document and just throw all of this stuff in, and then, yeah, even if some of it is duplications, and then work on it
Yeah.
to get it polished.
Yes. So
Yeah.
go ahead, Kate. Sorry.
I was just gonna say, Rehan, you created one. So I'm taking notes here and we can port this information over to there.
Yeah, and there's actually some material there already. So that's, which I think, you know, mostly goes in line what we are covering here, right?
Probably. I couldn't find that document. I need to.
Let me paste in the chat.
And then we also have like 5 more minutes too. Is there any top of mind in scope and out of scope that folks have?
Just a quick
Well-
question from my side. Were there any more feedback in the conversation at KubeCon about all this?
Well, I think KubeCon and it's related to InScope. I think the idea of covering device management, both the onboarding of the compute device as well as the IO devices that Kate covered, really seemed to draw quite an audience and quite a level of interest. So that clearly should be called out as in scope.
Mhm. What about edge orchestration?
Yeah, I think that should be in scope too. Edge orchestration of all forms, meaning Kubernetes, Nomad, whatever.
Mhm.
Things that haven't even been developed yet, potentially.
Any out of scope?
Well, I think we should be careful to not overlap other groups. So, we don't cover generic WebAssembly, for example. So maybe if we can come up with what the dividing line is, and it could even be kind of a broad gray colored dividing line, but we still should have some working idea of, how, suppose somebody wants to come in and just talk about WebAssembly in general. Is that appropriate for this group or not? Maybe it isn't. But we should not have to make that call in advance. It should kind of be made clear in what we write as our scope and out of scope.
Yeah, I think the line is literally where is it running and where are you focusing your efforts, kind of on that like Linux Foundation, like edge zones. If you're putting WebAssembly on the user edge, and then also this is Steve, something that we came across is people asking about kind of that networking, like network meshes, is that edge? If that isn't, it's not in the cloud necessarily, it's more of like kind of in the fog area, but they are huge servers and network specific, usually network provider specific, I mean. So
we've had this come up even in the Kubernetes on Edge Day on the review of CFPs, where people will come in with like a totally generic service mesh talk, but put in a one-liner saying, yes, this is service mesh, but you could run it at Edge. But really the whole talk is so generic that there's no aspect of it that's unique to Edge. So I think within the networking realm, we need a way of calling out that, Edge has some unique demands related to connectivity, and things that deal with that directly clearly are in scope, but just generic network topics, probably not. Let's suppose somebody came in and wanted to give a talk on IPv6 with the angle that, gee, Edge is going to need a whole bunch of new addresses. Therefore, this is related to Edge. I don't think that cuts it myself. I don't think it would belong as, a presentation at one of the meetings. Just a generic IPv6 talk.
And maybe do a little bit distinction between the edge and the typical on-premise computing, because they could look the same from certain aspects, right? I mean, running locally, but
even when you get into the scope that was just brought up today of the accelerators for machine learning, a talk that covered the kinds of devices that are made for Edge, low power, low cost, things that might run on ARMs at Edge nodes versus things that consume 6,000 watts and need 16 lanes of PCI Express. I think we can maybe stake a claim on, I don't know, almost generically call out that these broad areas like networking, machine learning acceleration hardware, etc., they're in scope only if what's being discussed is specifically edge related.
Yeah, I think a good way we could do that is for our in scope, out of scope. Maybe we have one in scope line that's like machine learning with regards to devices with constrained compute and air gapped connectivity, blah, 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 like give a line.
Yeah.
And then the out of scope would say like machine
general.
learning in general, like just kind of
Right.
give that example.
Uh-huh.
Could be
Yeah,
an
that makes
option.
sense to me.
Yeah.
I know another one that will come up that we actually have not had that many talks on, but it's sort of a unique venue is mobile devices. You know, I think it's been my experience that the bulk of our edge discussions have dealt with fixed location edge as opposed to mobile, like things running in the car or a truck. I'm nothing against covering them, and there is some overlap, but there's also a lot of unique aspects too that come into play when the, you know, your edge is actually moving around.
I think the main like a glue to all this is that like we can talk about machine learning, we can talk about embedded devices, mobile devices, but it has to be in the context of integrating that with some kind of a cloud solution, because to me that makes sense. Like that defines that this is the edge of the cloud system. So it's not a on-premise computing on its own. It's not embedded development on its own. It's building a system that tied those.
Well, the only thing I could say there is maybe
the cloud.
not, because you know there's an angle to this where you talk about air gapped, where people aren't going to a big giant public cloud, but still have a cloud out at a gateway location, and I think that's potentially in scope.
Yeah. But it still has a cloud. It's just a local cloud, right?
Okay, I got you.
So like a cloud, it has to have some kind of like a cloud native experience for users and administrators of those kind of systems. It can be
that makes
integrated with
sense.
central cloud, or it can be, pushing,
Yeah.
a smaller clouds to the edge, right?
I mean, almost by definition, if you get a large enough count of edge nodes in order to plausibly manage them, you've effectively built a cloud that's composed of compute out at the leaf nodes, right?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, though. This is within the CNCF. It must have some sort of cloud native computing experience, whether that is an orchestration experience due to the size of the number of servers that you have, or whether it's literally integrating your edge system with your cloud system, these two separate environments. I think that's a good, that was a good add.
Okay, by the way, I think we could go on, but it's already 11:04. I think for some of us it feels late. I think I'm tempted to drop, even if the rest of you want to keep going. But how about if we call it quits for this meeting?
I think that's wise.
Sounds good. And let's keep let's put all these notes in the charter talk and continue, working on that, right?
Okay, that sounds great.
Do we want to create like kind of a timeline? I think it would be good to kind of get a PR in fairly soon. And I don't see a reason why we can't, if it's going to be kind of brief to start at least.
Yeah, even if it's imperfect, we can still submit it, right?
Yeah. And it's in Markdown, even though this is a Google Doc. So, and also is this public, Dehan? Can I add it to the agenda notes?
I think so, yeah. Let me see. I'll make it public, yeah.
Okay.
You're talking about the group charter document, right?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
I added it there. Great. Yeah, maybe I think by the next meeting, it would be good to have that PR up. And I think that's feasible. I don't know. What are y'all's thoughts?
By the next meeting, yeah, definitely. I think I'm out.
Oh, Steve, you're muted.
Yeah, I don't see a reason why not.
Great. We could even aim for earlier. Yeah.
And then
let's-
speaking of next meeting, I guess, do either of you have a speaker lined up or something? The one other thing we could potentially inject is Kilton's presentation that didn't manage to get in. And I haven't checked back with him yet on whether he wants to go with that, but otherwise I could follow up with Intel or Portainer or some of the other people in the queue.
Yeah, maybe we go ahead and create like a kind of have slots at the top of our document where people can kind of sign up and choose one. Because I think the container orchestrated device folks were interested in presenting that kind of is the opposite of what we were saying about scoping away from other working groups. So I don't know if we want to do that, but I think it would be interesting to kind
Yeah,
of
I
hear
would
what
like
they're
to
up
hear that. So if
Okay.
they want it, let's just give them the next slot or at least offer it to them.
Great. Yeah, I'll reach out to them then and say that they have the next one. And then if they say
Okay.
no, we can then, if they want another couple weeks, we can pass it off.
Okay,
Oh.
sounds good.
So I'll be out probably most of that week when the next meeting is. So maybe we can target the deadline the Friday before. So
Sure.
next Friday, no, not this week, but the next week. I think there's a plenty of time to push a PR.
Yeah,
Okay.
Cool.
I think that's fine.
Okay. Thanks for this.
Okay, let's declare this meeting
Cool.
closed. So until
Okay.
the next one. Bye, everybody.
Thanks for coming, Rashit.
Yeah. See you around, folks.
Bye, everyone.